The wind howled across the Hardanger Fjord like the breath of dying giants, carrying with it the bitter taste of salt and ancient snow. Bjorn Eriksson pulled his fur-lined hood tighter against his weathered face as his boots crunched through the frozen shoreline. 5 years of exile in the Scottish Isles had hardened him, but nothing compared to the merciless embrace of a Norwegian winter at its cruelest. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the jagged peaks that surrounded the fjord like the walls of Valhalla itself. Ice had claimed the water's edge, spreading inward in crystalline fingers that reached toward the dark heart of the fjord, where the current still fought against winter's grip. Bjorn had been walking for 3 days since the fishing boat dropped him at Odda, following the old coastal path toward what remained of his family's land near Ulvik. He didn't expect to find anyone out here. The villages along this stretch had been abandoned years ago, their populations drawn to Bergen or Oslo, leaving only the stones and memories behind. That's why the dark shape on the ice stopped him cold. At first he thought it was a seal, or perhaps driftwood caught in the freeze. But as he approached, his heart hammered with a recognition that defied logic. It was a woman, half buried in the snow and ice, her body curled like a child seeking warmth that would never come. Fien, Bjorn cursed, breaking into a run despite the treacherous surface. She lay face down, one arm outstretched as if reaching for something just beyond her grasp. Her dress, though torn and frozen stiff, had once been fine, woven with patterns that spoke of old traditions, the kind his grandmother used to make. Long, dark hair spread around her head like a raven's wing, decorated with ice crystals that caught what little light pierced the clouds. Bjorn dropped to his knees beside her, his hands already moving to check for signs of life even as his mind told him it was hopeless. No one survived exposure like this. Her skin, where it showed through her inadequate clothing, had taken on the bluish-white pallor of the dead. But when his calloused fingers found the hollow of her throat, he felt it, the faintest flutter of a pulse so weak it might have been his imagination. "Can you hear me?" His voice came out rougher than intended, rusty from days of solitary travel. No response. Her lips had turned the color of storm clouds, slightly parted as if frozen mid-prayer or curse. Bjorn made his decision in an instant. He shrugged off his heavy pack and pulled out the oiled canvas tarp he used for shelter. Working quickly despite his freezing fingers, he wrapped her completely, then hoisted her over his shoulder. She weighed almost nothing, as if the cold had already begun turning her into something less than human, more like the ice spirits his grandmother's stories warned about. The nearest shelter was the old fishing hut he'd spotted an hour back, built into the rocks where the fjord curved. Bjorn retraced his steps, each one deliberate on the slick surface, his burden a constant reminder of how fragile the line between life and death truly was. The wind picked up, throwing snow in horizontal sheets that stung his exposed skin. It was as if the storm itself resented his rescue, wanted to claim what it had marked for taking. By the time he kicked open the hut's warped door, his legs were shaking with exhaustion. Inside, the small space smelled of old fish and mildew, but it was dry and the walls would block the wind. Bjorn laid the woman on the floor as gently as his fatigue allowed, then set about building a fire in the stone hearth. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, kindling first, then larger pieces of driftwood he found stacked in the corner, likely left by the last fisherman to use this place decades ago. The fire caught, throwing dancing shadows across the woman's still form. In the growing light, Bjorn could see her more clearly. She was perhaps 30 years old, with strong features that spoke of Nordic heritage running pure and deep. There was something almost ethereal about her face, a quality he couldn't quite name, as if she belonged to the old paintings in the stave churches rather than the modern world. He removed the tarp and began the careful work of warming her. He'd seen men die from being warmed too quickly after freezing, their hearts giving out from the shock. Bjorn rubbed her hands and feet gently, then pulled his own sleeping furs around her body. He heated water from his canteen over the fire, then used his spare shirt, dampened and warmed, to carefully thaw her face and neck. "Come on," he murmured, watching for any sign of response. "You didn't survive this long just to give up now." An hour passed, then 2. The storm outside intensified, rattling the hut's shutters and finding every gap in the walls to send icy fingers through. Bjorn fed the fire steadily, rationing his wood supply, all the while monitoring the woman who remained. Locked in her death-like stillness, he was beginning to lose hope when her eyes finally opened. They were the color of the Fjord in summer, deep green with flecks of gray, like light playing on deep water. But there was something ancient in that gaze, something that made Bjorn's breath catch. She stared at him without fear or surprise, as if waking next to a stranger in a fishing hut during a blizzard was the most natural thing in the world. "You pulled me from the ice," she said, her voice hoarse but eerily calm. "I found you half frozen. You're lucky to be alive." A strange smile touched her pale lips. "Am I lucky?" She sat up slowly, the furs falling from her shoulders. She should have been weak, disoriented, but she moved with a grace that seemed impossible. "What is your name, stranger who meddles with fate?" "Bjorn Eriksson. And you?" "Solveig." She looked at the fire, and for a moment her composure cracked, revealing something raw underneath. "Solveig Håkonsdottir, though that name means nothing now. I am the widow of ghosts, the last voice of a silenced village." Bjorn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You're speaking in riddles." "What village? What happened to you out there?" Solveig turned those unsettling eyes back to him. "I was walking to the place where they all went. Where my husband went 5 winters past. The fjord took them all during the festival of Jul. 37 souls swallowed by black water that rose without warning, without storm." Her voice remained steady, but Bjorn saw her hands clench the furs. "The elders said it was punishment. That my husband as chieftain had broken oath with the old gods. That Odin himself had turned his face from us. That's superstition," Bjorn said, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd heard stories of entire villages vanishing along these coasts, swallowed by avalanche or flood. Their fates recorded only in church registries and fading memory. "Is it?" Solveig's laugh was bitter. "I was the seeress of Bjorheim. The vulva they came to for wisdom, for prophecy, for healing. And when my own husband stood before the gathered village and declared we would no longer make the old offerings, would turn only to the white Christ and his priests, I said nothing. I supported him." She closed her eyes. 3 days later, the fjord rose. I was inland gathering herbs. When I returned, there was nothing. No bodies, no wreckage, just silence and water. Bjorn wanted to dismiss her words as the ravings of a traumatized mind, but something in her telling rang with terrible truth. He'd seen the power of the sea, its capacity for sudden violence, and he'd heard the old tales too many times to completely discard them, even if his rational mind rebelled. "Why were you on the ice?" he asked instead. "Because Odin forgot me long ago," Solveig whispered. And now her voice did break. "Because I've spent 5 years trying to understand, trying to make amends, trying to find where they went. The dreams won't stop, Bjorn Eriksson. Every night I see them under the ice, preserved and waiting. My husband calls to me. He says the bargain isn't finished, that there's still a price to be paid." She met his eyes again, and Bjorn saw the madness lurking there, kept at bay by sheer will. "I was going to join them, walk into the fjord and let it take me too, but it wouldn't. The ice formed under my feet with each step, as if even death doesn't want me, as if I'm being saved for something worse." The wind screamed outside, and for just a moment Bjorn could have sworn he heard voices in it. Dozens of voices calling out in the old tongue. He shook his head, dismissing it as imagination, but Solveig had gone rigid, her head cocked as if listening. "They know you brought me back," she said softly. "They're not pleased." "Who?" "The drowned. The forgotten." She looked at him with something like pity. "You should have left me, Bjorn Eriksson. Now you're part of it too, part of the debt that must be settled." Bjorn stood abruptly, needing to move, to do something other than sit in this cramped hut listening to prophecies of doom from a woman who should be dead. He went to the door and pushed it open despite the storm's fury. Snow and wind blasted his face, but he welcomed the sharp reality of it. The fjord stretched before him, dark water churning where the ice hadn't claimed it, and there, barely visible through the snow, he saw lights beneath the surface. Pale green lights that moved with purpose, as if something was swimming in deliberate patterns, drawing closer. He slammed the door shut, his heart pounding. "You see them now," Solveig said from behind him. It wasn't a question. "The Draugr, the drowned ones who cannot rest. They've been waiting, Bjorn. Waiting for someone strong enough to finish what was started. Someone brave enough or foolish enough to walk the path to its end." "This is madness," Bjorn said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew he didn't fully believe them. Something was happening here, something that defied the rational world he'd tried to build during his exile. Solveig stood, wrapped in his furs like a queen in royal robes. Tomorrow the storm will pass, and then you must choose, my reluctant savior. Leave me here and flee south. Try to outrun what's been set in motion, or follow me into the heart of the fjord to the place where Bjorheim sank, where the boundary between our world and Hell's domain grows thin. She paused. There are answers there, I think. And perhaps redemption, or perhaps just the ending that was always meant to be. Bjorn stared at this strange woman, this self-proclaimed seeress with her talk of drowned villages and angry gods. Every instinct told him to leave at first light, to put as much distance between himself and this cursed place as possible. But another part of him, the part that had survived exile through sheer stubborn determination, the part that still believed in honor even when the world seemed to have forgotten it, that part wouldn't let him abandon her. Why me? He asked finally. Why did the ice let me find you? Solveig smiled sadly. Because you're carrying guilt too, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes and the way you move. You're running from something, just as surely as I'm running toward it. Perhaps that's what they need, two broken souls to mend what was shattered. She was right, and they both knew it. Bjorn had left Norway in disgrace, blamed for a death he couldn't prevent, exiled by family members who needed someone to shoulder their grief. He'd spent 5 years trying to forget, and now here he was, drawn back to his homeland only to find new mysteries, new burdens. Get some rest, he said gruffly, settling back against the wall. We'll talk more when the storm passes. But as he watched her curl back into the furs, as he listened to the wind carry its chorus of impossible voices, Bjorn knew his decision was already made. He would follow her to Bjorheim. He would see this through to whatever end awaited. The fire crackled and popped, throwing shadows that seemed to dance with purpose, and somewhere deep in the fjord, ancient things stirred in anticipation. Dawn broke reluctantly over the Hardanger Fjord, the sun a pale disk behind lingering clouds. The storm had exhausted itself sometime before morning, leaving the world wrapped in fresh snow and an eerie silence. Bjorn woke to find Solveig already awake, sitting cross-legged before the dying fire, staring into the embers as if reading messages written in ash and flame. You stayed? She said without looking at him. I said I would. Bjorn stretched his stiff muscles and added wood to the fire, though I'm still not sure I believe half of what you told me last night. You saw the lights in the water. He had no answer to that. The memory remained vivid, those pale green illuminations moving with uncanny intelligence beneath the fjord's surface. In the morning light it seemed easier to dismiss as illusion, but the certainty in his gut remained. Solveig finally turned to face him. In the daylight filtering through the hut's cracks, she looked more human, less like some creature from the old stories. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of suffering endured, and her hands, when she held them out to the fire, trembled slightly. Tell me about your husband, Bjorn said as he prepared a simple breakfast from his supplies. What was he like? Her expression softened. Hakon was complicated, strong, beloved by our people, but increasingly troubled by the conflict between the old ways and the new. Bjorheim was isolated enough that we'd maintained traditions other villages had abandoned, the offerings to Odin and Thor, the seasonal rites, respect for the landvetter and sea spirits. She accepted the dried fish and hardtack he offered, but the priests from Bergen came and they brought compelling arguments. Christianity offered unity with the greater kingdom, protection under the king's law, trade opportunities. So he converted, Bjorn said. Many did. He did more than convert. He declared the old ways forbidden, ordered the destruction of the offerings, said anyone who continued the traditions would be cast out. Solveig's voice hardened. I warned him. I told him the spirits would not tolerate such disrespect, that there were proper ways to transition, rituals to close the old pacts honorably. But he wouldn't listen. He called my vulva practices superstition, said I was embarrassing him before the priests. That must have hurt. It destroyed something between us, she admitted, but I loved him still. I thought in time he would see balance was possible, that we didn't have to erase our heritage to embrace new faith. She laughed bitterly. I was wrong. 3 days after he made his declaration at the Jule gathering, the fjord took them all. I was inland gathering mistletoe for a healing poultice, ironic, isn't it? Using the old herb craft even as my husband tried to abolish it. Bjorn chewed his food thoughtfully. And you've spent 5 years trying to understand what happened? Trying to fix it, Solveig corrected. I studied everything I could find about the old pacts, the agreements between humans and the powers that dwell in water and stone. I traveled to Uppsala, to the last of the true vulvas who maintain the traditions. They taught me things my grandmother never knew, deeper magics, darker bargains. Her eyes took on a distant quality, and they all said the same thing, that a debt was created, a wound in the fabric between worlds. The drowned of Bjorheim cannot rest because the breach remains open. They are trapped, existing in the space between life and death, and their torment echoes across the boundary. What kind of debt? Bjorn asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Solveig stood and moved to the window, looking out at the fjord that lay calm and deceptively beautiful under fresh snow. When my husband broke the pact without proper ritual closure, he essentially stole from the gods. Centuries of offerings, of respect, of maintained balance, all dismissed as worthless. In the old way of thinking, that's theft of the highest order. The gods demanded payment. Your village, their lives, yes, but also something more. She turned back to him, and Bjorn saw tears tracking down her cheeks. Their deaths were supposed to complete the payment, close the account. But because no seeress was present to speak the proper rites, to guide their souls and seal the breach, they became stuck. And I should have been there. As vulva, it was my duty to stand between the people and the powers, to maintain the balance even when they wouldn't. I failed them all. Bjorn crossed to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You can't blame yourself for not being present during a disaster. You might have drowned with them. Perhaps I should have. Solveig wiped her eyes angrily. But the gods, or whatever forces govern these things, they kept me alive for a reason. All these years I've felt them watching, waiting. The dreams grew stronger each winter, pulling me back here. And last week, I finally understood. I dreamed of a man coming from across the sea, marked by exile and guilt, strong enough to help me finish what needs doing. A chill ran down Bjorn's spine. You dreamed of me? I dreamed of someone like you, someone who understands the weight of responsibility and failure. She met his eyes directly. Tell me, Bjorn Eriksson, what did you do to earn exile? What guilt drives you back to Norway's cold embrace? For a long moment he considered refusing to answer, but something about Solveig's confession, her raw honesty, demanded reciprocation. He moved back to the fire and sat heavily. My younger brother Magnus was always reckless, he began, brave to the point of stupidity. During a storm, he took a boat out to check the nets despite my warnings. I watched from shore as the waves took him. I was the better swimmer, the stronger man, but by the time I reached the water, he was already gone beneath the surface. Bjorn's hands clenched. I dove, again and again, until I could barely stand, until they had to drag me out. But I never found him. That's not your fault, Solveig said gently. His widow didn't see it that way. Neither did my father. They said I should have gone with him. Should have stopped him. Should have somehow saved him. The family needed someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. He laughed without humor. So I left. Took exile in Scotland. Worked on fishing boats, tried to become someone else. It didn't work. Solveig knelt beside him. We're alike, you and I. Both haunted by those we couldn't save, both running from and toward our failures. Perhaps that's why the fjord brought us together. I don't believe in fate, Bjorn said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. You don't have to believe in it for it to work. She placed her hand over his. Come with me to Bjorheim. Help me perform the rites that should have been done 5 years ago. Free the drowned from their torment and seal the breach between worlds. And maybe, just maybe, we can both find some measure of peace. Bjorn looked at her hand on his, felt the warmth of human contact he'd denied himself for so long. It would be so easy to refuse, to walk away. But he'd spent 5 years running, and it had brought him exactly nowhere. What do these rites involve? He asked instead. Relief flickered across Solveig's face. We traveled to where Bjorheim stood, at the deepest part of the fjord where 3 tributaries meet. There's a stone circle there, submerged now but still potent. At sunset, when the boundary between day and night thins, I'll perform the vulva ceremony, speak the words, make the offerings, guide the trapped souls to their proper rest. She hesitated. But the Draugr won't want to let go. They've been in torment so long that rage has consumed them. They'll try to stop us, to pull us down with them. And that's where I come in. I need someone to anchor me to this world, to keep me from being dragged across the boundary while I work. Someone strong in body and spirit, Someone who can resist the pull of the dead. Solveig squeezed his hand. I need you, Bjorn. He should have said no. Every rational part of him screamed to refuse this mad venture. But the part of him that had died with Magnus, the part that still heard his brother's voice in dreams, that part understood what Solveig was offering, not just a chance to help her, but a path to his own redemption. How long will it take to reach Bjorheim? If we leave now, we can be there by afternoon. The ice is thick enough to walk on, and I know the paths. She smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. Thank you, Bjorn. Whatever happens, thank you for not abandoning me. They gathered their minimal supplies and set out into the snow-bright morning. The fjord stretched before them, its surface a complex pattern of ice and dark water, beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. Solveig led the way with surprising confidence, finding routes across the frozen sections that Bjorn would never have trusted alone. As they walked, she taught him about the old ways, not to convert him, she said, but so he would understand what they faced. She spoke of the 9 worlds connected by Yggdrasil, of Helheim where the dishonored dead dwelt, of the thin places where boundaries between worlds grew permeable. Her knowledge was vast and strange, mixing practical wisdom with mythology in ways that made it hard to separate superstition from truth. Do you really believe all this? Bjorn asked as they paused to rest near midday. Gods and giants and world trees? Solveig considered the question seriously. I believe there are forces we don't understand, patterns deeper than human knowledge. Whether we call them gods or spirits or natural laws doesn't matter as much as recognizing they exist and respecting them. She looked out at the fjord. Something destroyed Bjorheim, Bjorn. Something took 37 people without leaving a trace. I choose to call that force divine punishment because it gives me a framework for understanding and responding. What would you call it? He had no answer. They continued walking, and as the sun arced toward afternoon, the landscape began to change. The mountains pressed closer, casting long shadows across the ice. The water visible through breaks in the frozen surface looked darker here, almost black, as if light couldn't fully penetrate its depths. We're close, Solveig said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Can you feel it? The weight in the air. Bjorn could. There was a heaviness here, a sense of held breath as if the world itself was waiting for something. The temperature seemed to drop despite the clear sky, and his breath plumed in thick clouds. Ahead, the fjord widened into a natural basin where 3 valleys converged, their streams feeding the main waterway. Even covered in ice and snow, the location had a stark beauty, a sense of ancient significance. Bjorn could see why people had built here. There, Solveig pointed to a section of ice near the basin's center. That's where the village stood, where the stone circle waits beneath the water. As they approached, Bjorn began to see shapes beneath the ice, shadows that might have been rocks or structures or something else entirely. His heart rate picked up and he found his hand drifting to the knife at his belt. Though what good it would do against drowned ghosts he couldn't say. Solveig stopped at what seemed to be an arbitrary point, though Bjorn suspected she was guided by knowledge beyond his perception. She knelt and brushed snow away from the ice, revealing a surface smooth as glass. And there, clearly visible perhaps 10 feet below, were the stones, massive monoliths arranged in a circle, their surfaces carved with runes that seemed to writhe in the filtered light. We wait for sunset, Solveig said. The ceremony must be performed at the threshold between day and night, when all boundaries grow weak. They had perhaps 2 hours. Bjorn built a small fire on the ice using oil and driftwood from his pack. It wouldn't last long, but it would provide some warmth. As they waited, Solveig prepared her ritual tools with methodical care, a knife of bone and bronze, a wooden bowl carved with symbols, herbs and powders from pouches at her belt. Tell me what to expect, Bjorn said, watching her work. I need to know what I'm facing. Solveig didn't look up from her preparations. When I begin the chant, the boundary will thin. The Draugr will sense it and rise from below. They'll be angry, confused, trapped in the moment of their deaths. Some may remember who they were, but most will be consumed by their pain and rage. She finally met his eyes. They'll try to drag us down to make us join them. Your job is to hold me here, to keep me anchored in the living world no matter what you see or hear. Can you do that? I'll do whatever it takes, Bjorn promised and meant it. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the shadows grew long and the temperature plummeted. The ice beneath them creaked and groaned as if something massive shifted in the depths below. Bjorn felt his pulse quicken, adrenaline sharpening his senses. Solveig stood, moving to stand directly above the stone circle. She raised her arms and began to speak in a language Bjorn didn't understand. The old tongue, he realized, the language of the sagas and eddas that predated modern Norwegian. Her voice carried across the ice, echoing off the surrounding mountains, and the fjord answered. The ice began to glow with that same pale green light Bjorn had seen the night before, but much stronger now, pulsing in rhythm with Solveig's chanting. Shapes moved beneath the surface, humanoid but wrong, their movements too fluid and graceful for anything living. "They're coming," Solveig said, her voice strained. "Remember your promise, Bjorn. No matter what happens, don't let go." She reached back and Bjorn took her hand, gripping tight. The moment their skin touched, he felt it, a pulling sensation, as if invisible hands were tugging him toward the ice, toward the dark water below. The ceremony had begun, and there would be no turning back. The cold emanating from beneath the ice was unnatural, seeping through Bjorn's boots and into his bones with malicious intent. Solveig's chanting grew louder, the ancient words rolling across the frozen fjord like thunder. The green glow intensified, and now Bjorn could see them clearly, faces pressed against the underside of the ice. Dozens of them, mouths open in silent screams, eyes vacant and terrible. "Spirits of Bjorheim," Solveig called out, switching to Norwegian so Bjorn could understand. "Hear me. I am Solveig Hakonsdottir, Velva of your village, daughter of your land. I have come to fulfill the duty I failed 5 winters past. I have come to guide you home." The response was immediate and violent. The ice beneath them cracked with a sound like breaking bones. Water surged up through the fissures, black and freezing, carrying with it the stench of decay and deep places. Bjorn tightened his grip on Solveig's hand as she swayed, her eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. "They're so angry," she gasped. "They don't understand. They think I abandoned them deliberately." "Tell them the truth," Bjorn urged, fighting against the pull that threatened to drag them both down. "Make them understand." Solveig steadied herself, drawing on some inner reserve of strength. When she spoke again, her voice carried a power that made the air vibrate. "I was not there when you needed me most, and for that I carry eternal shame. But I did not abandon you by choice. The fjord took you before I could return, before I could speak the rites that would have eased your passage. I have suffered your absence every day since, lived with the weight of my failure." The pulling sensation lessened slightly, and some of the faces beneath the ice seemed to focus, as if really seeing her for the first time. "But I am here now," Solveig continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "I stand before you with the power and knowledge to finish what should have been done, to close the wound, to free you from this torment, to send you on to the halls where the honored dead feast and fight and find peace." She raised her free hand, the bone knife gleaming in the dying sunlight. "Will you let me help you? Will you finally accept the gift you were denied?" For a moment, everything went still. The water stopped surging, the wind died. Even the creaking of the ice ceased. It was as if the entire fjord held its breath, waiting. Then one figure rose from beneath the ice, passing through it as if it were mist rather than solid matter. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a beard braided in the old style, and eyes that held both recognition and infinite sorrow. He wore the remnants of what had once been fine clothes, now sodden and torn, and around his neck hung a Thor's hammer amulet alongside a Christian cross, symbols of the dual faith that had destroyed him. "Hakon," Solveig whispered, and Bjorn felt her hand tremble in his. "My husband." The Draugr that had been Hakon Haraldsson studied his widow with an expression that might have been love or hate or both. When he spoke, his voice sounded like water running over stones, hollow and ancient. "You came. After all this time, you finally came. I never stopped trying to reach you," Solveig said, tears streaming down her face. "I never stopped searching for a way to bring you peace." "Peace?" Hakon laughed bitterly. "There is no peace in this place, wife. Only cold and darkness and the knowledge of our failure. I led them wrong, broke the old pacts in my arrogance, and this is the reward. We are trapped between worlds, unable to move forward or back, existing in eternal torment." "It doesn't have to be that way," Solveig insisted. "The breach can be closed, the debt settled. I can guide you all to proper rest, but you must accept it. You must let go of your anger and accept the passage I offer." Hakon drifted closer and Bjorn tensed, ready to pull Solveig back if necessary. But the Draugr made no aggressive move. Instead, he reached out with a translucent hand, almost touching his wife's face but stopping just short, as if an invisible barrier prevented full contact. "I loved you," Håkon said softly. "In my pride and blindness, I dismissed your wisdom, called your gift superstition. But I never stopped loving you, Solveig, and now I cannot reach you, cannot hold you, cannot even beg forgiveness properly." "You have my forgiveness," Solveig said immediately. "You always had it. You were trying to do what you thought was best for our people." "I was trying to make myself more important," Håkon corrected bitterly. "The priests promised me influence, respect from the king's court in Bergen. I sacrificed our traditions for political ambition." His form flickered, becoming less substantial. "And the gods, or whatever powers we offended, they made sure I understood my mistake. Made sure we all paid." More figures were rising now, passing through the ice to stand in a circle around Solveig and Bjorn. Men, women, even children, all bearing the marks of drowning, all staring with those terrible empty eyes. Bjorn recognized some of the faces from his childhood. His father had traded with Bjorheim when he was young, before the village's isolation became complete. "Please," an old woman said, her voice the whisper of wind through dead branches. "Please let us go. We're so tired of this existence, so weary of being caught between." "I will," Solveig promised. "That's why I'm here. But you must all agree to accept passage. You must all let go of your anger and pain and allow me to guide you across the boundary." "And what of the debt?" Håkon asked. "The powers we offended demanded payment. Our deaths were supposed to settle that account, but instead we're trapped." "What makes you think they'll accept a ceremony now?" Solveig's hand clenched on Bjorn's, and he felt her draw strength from the contact. "Because I'm offering something more. Not just the ceremony, but a true vulva's sacrifice. My life, my power, my connection to the old ways. Everything I am I offer to close the breach and seal the passage. That should be payment enough." "No," Bjorn said sharply, finally understanding the full extent of her plan. "You didn't tell me you were planning to die doing this. Would you have come if I had?" Solveig asked, not looking at him. "Solveig, you can't—" "I'm the only Velva left who remembers the true rites," she interrupted. "I'm the only one who can speak the words with enough power to bridge worlds. And I'm the one who should have done this 5 years ago. This is my debt to pay, Bjorn. Let me pay it." Håkon was shaking his head, his spectral form rippling with agitation. "No, I won't let you sacrifice yourself for my mistakes. I led us to this doom. Let me bear the consequences." "You can't," Solveig said gently. "You're already dead, husband. You have nothing left to give except your acceptance. But I still live. Still carry the spark of vulva power that connects me to the old forces. That's what's needed to complete the ritual." The sun touched the mountain peaks, painting the snow blood red. The moment of twilight was approaching, the threshold time when magic was strongest. The Draugr seemed to sense it too, their forms becoming more solid, more present. Some looked hopeful while others radiated suspicion and rage. "There must be another way," Bjorn said desperately. He'd just found this woman, this kindred spirit who understood guilt and duty and the weight of failure. The thought of losing her to fulfill some ancient bargain made his chest tight with unexpected grief. Solveig finally looked at him, and her smile was sad but genuine. "You're a good man, Bjorn Eriksson. In another life, perhaps we could have had more time. But this is the life we were given, and these are the choices we must make." She squeezed his hand one final time. "When it's done, when they're at rest and the breach is sealed, promise me you'll leave this place. Go home, make peace with your family. Don't let guilt define the rest of your life like it defined mine. Solveig, promise me." Bjorn met her eyes and saw the determination there. The acceptance of fate he'd seen in warriors before their final battles. She'd made her decision long before finding him on the ice, had probably made it years ago. Nothing he said would change her mind. "I promise," he said hoarsely. The sun slipped behind the peaks and twilight claimed the fjord. Solveig raised both hands now, releasing Bjorn's grip, and began the true ceremony. Her voice rose in the old tongue, words of power that seemed to come from the earth itself. The bone knife flashed as she cut her palm, letting blood drip onto the ice where it steamed and hissed. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The ice cracked completely, great sections breaking away to reveal dark water that churned with unnatural violence. The Draugr began to wail, a chorus of the dead that echoed off the mountains and made Bjorn's ears ring. More spirits rose from the depths, not just the villagers of Bjorheim, but older presences. things that had dwelt in the fjord long before humans came to these shores. Solveig's chant became a scream, her voice straining to maintain the words as power flowed through her. Her hair whipped in a wind that came from nowhere, and her eyes blazed with green light that matched the glow beneath the water. She was becoming something more than human. A conduit between worlds, a bridge for the trapped souls to cross. "Go," she commanded the Draugr, and her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I open the way. I speak the names of the dead and call them home. Hakon Haraldsson, Astrid Eriksdottir, Bjorn Torsson, Ingrid," she recited all 37 names, and with each one, a figure stepped forward and began to fade, their forms becoming translucent, then vanishing entirely. They went quietly now, gratefully, released at last from their torment. Some smiled as they faded, others wept. Hakon lingered longest, staring at his wife with an expression of profound sorrow and pride. "Thank you," he mouthed, and then he too was gone. But the ceremony wasn't finished. The older presences remained, the spirits of water and stone that had witnessed the breaking of oaths. They circled Solveig like predators, testing her strength. "Demanding their payment, I offer myself," Solveig declared, her voice now resonating with multiple tones, as if she spoke in harmony with forces beyond human understanding. "I, Solveig Hakon's daughter, Völva and Ciares' last daughter of the old blood, take my life as payment for the debt owed. Take my power to seal the breach. Accept this offering and release the trapped. Restore the balance that was broken." The spirits converged on her in a rush of water and light. Solveig gasped, her body going rigid as they poured into her, through her, consuming the life force she offered. Bjorn lunged forward, instinct overriding reason, trying to pull her back. But an invisible force slammed into him, sending him sprawling on the cracking ice. "No," he shouted, scrambling to his feet. "The debt is paid. You have what you demanded. Let her go." But the spirits were beyond hearing, beyond mercy. They were forces of nature, bound by laws older than humanity, and the ritual had its own momentum now. Solveig's skin began to glow from within, cracks of light appearing as if her body couldn't contain the power flowing through it. She looked at Bjorn one last time, and despite everything, she smiled. "It's all right," she said, her voice peaceful. "I can feel them, all of them, finding their way home. The breach is closing. It's working. There has to be another way to finish it," Bjorn pleaded. "Don't let go. Fight it." "I'm not fighting, Bjorn, I'm choosing." Her form began to fade, becoming translucent like the Draugr had been. "Tell my story, will you? Tell people that Solveig of Bjorheim did her duty in the end, that she paid the price her husband could not. Don't let us be forgotten." "I won't," Bjorn promised through tears he didn't remember shedding. "I'll remember. I'll tell them." Solveig closed her eyes and the light consumed her completely. There was a sound like a great door slamming shut, a sensation of pressure releasing, and then silence. When Bjorn's vision cleared, she was gone. No body, no trace, just the cracked ice and dark water and the dying twilight. The oppressive weight he'd felt since approaching this place had vanished. The air felt lighter, cleaner, as if a festering wound had finally been cleansed. The spirits were gone, the Draugr were gone, and the breach between worlds had sealed. Solveig had succeeded, but the cost made Bjorn want to howl at the indifferent sky. He stood alone on the breaking ice, surrounded by the darkening fjord, and for a long moment considered simply letting himself slip into the water. Join Solveig and all the others who'd been claimed by this cursed place, end the cycle of guilt and loss that seemed to follow him everywhere. But he'd made a promise. 2 promises, actually, to Solveig and to himself. He would leave this place. He would go home. He would try somehow to make peace with the past and build something resembling a future. The ice groaned beneath him, reminding him that staying here meant death regardless of his choices. Bjorn turned away from the place where Bjorheim had stood and began the long walk back to shore. Each step took him farther from the woman who'd given everything to fulfill her duty, and closer to a life he wasn't sure he deserved. Behind him, the fjord settled into stillness, the dark water reflecting the first stars of evening. The dead were at rest, the old debt settled, and the living could begin again, if they were strong enough to carry the weight of what had been sacrificed. 3 months had passed since that twilight on the fjord, and Bjorn still woke most nights seeing Solveig's face as she faded into light. Spring had come to Norway, transforming the harsh winter landscape into something gentler, though no less beautiful. The snow retreated to the high peaks, revealing meadows of wild flowers and streams that sang with meltwater. Bjorn had kept his promise. He'd returned to his family's lands near Ulvik, to the farm his father had expanded with profits from fishing and trade. The reunion had been awkward at first. 5 years of silence and resentment don't dissolve easily. But Bjorn came bearing not just his return, but a story that needed telling. He sat now in the main hall of the farmhouse, surrounded by family and neighbors gathered for the traditional spring feast. The fire crackled in the central hearth, and the smell of roasted lamb mixed with fresh bread and ale. His father, Eric, gray-haired and weathered but still strong, sat at the head of the table. Magnus's widow Astrid sat nearby with her new husband, a good man from Bergen who'd given her and her children stability. "Tell it again," Astrid said quietly. She'd asked to hear the story of Bjorheim 3 times now, and each telling seemed to bring her some measure of peace. "Tell us about the vulva." Bjorn took a drink of ale to wet his throat. He'd become something of a skald these past months, refining the tale until it flowed with the rhythm of the old sagas, not because he enjoyed the attention but because Solveig had asked him to remember, to make sure their story wasn't forgotten. "In the depths of winter," he began, and the hall quieted, all attention turning to him. "I found a woman half buried in the ice of Fjord. Her name was Solveig Håkonsdottir, and she was the last vulva of a village that had been swallowed by the sea 5 years before." He told it all: the storm, the rescue, Solveig's confession about Bjorheim's fate and her husband's broken oaths. He described the journey across the ice, the stone circle beneath the water, and the rising of the Draugr when twilight came. He spoke of Hakon's ghost and the old woman who'd begged for release, of the ancient spirits that demanded payment, and of Solveig's final sacrifice. She stood there as the powers consumed her, Bjorn said, his voice rough with emotion even after so many tellings, and she smiled, because she knew that 37 souls were finally finding peace, that the wound between worlds was being healed. She gave everything to fulfill a duty that wasn't even her fault to fail. That's what true honor looks like. Not the glory of battle or conquest, but the willingness to pay the price for others' mistakes. The hall remained silent for a long moment after he finished. Then his father stood, raising his drinking horn. "To Solveig of Bjorheim," he declared. "To the vulva who remembered duty when others forgot. May her story be told as long as the fjords endure." "To Solveig," the gathered voices echoed, and they drank. Later, as the feast wound down and people began departing for their homes, Astrid approached Bjorn. She'd been kind to him since his return, understanding in a way he hadn't expected. Perhaps she too had learned something about forgiveness in the years since Magnus's death. "Thank you for telling her story," Astrid said, "and for coming home. I was wrong to blame you for Magnus. He made his own choices just as your vulva's husband made his. We can't carry responsibility for every decision others make. But we can try to help them," Bjorn said. "That's what I should have done. Gone with Magnus or tied him to the dock if necessary. And that's what Solveig did do. She walked into danger to save people who were already dead, because it was the right thing. And nearly got you killed in the process," Astrid pointed out with a slight smile. "From what you've said, those spirits could have dragged you down too. But you stayed anyway. That's also honor, Bjorn. Staying when you could have run." She squeezed his arm and left to gather her children, leaving Bjorn to his thoughts. His father joined him by the fire. 2 men separated by years and grief, but perhaps finding their way back to understanding. "I've been thinking," Eric said without preamble, "about what you said regarding the old ways and the new. This vulva of yours, she died because people forgot how to honor both traditions properly. Maybe there's wisdom in that." Bjorn looked at his father with surprise. Eric had always been a practical man, more concerned with profitable fishing than spiritual matters. "What do you mean?" "The priests tell us to forget everything that came before, to treat our ancestors' beliefs as primitive superstition. But those beliefs kept our people alive and thriving for centuries. Maybe we shouldn't erase them completely." Eric stared into the fire. "I've been talking with the priest in Ulvik. He's a reasonable man, educated. He agrees that respecting our heritage doesn't contradict Christian faith, that we can honor the land and the old wisdom while still following the new path." Solveig would have appreciated that, Bjorn said softly. Balance was what she wanted, what her husband failed to achieve. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to coals. Finally, Eric spoke again. Will you stay? The farm needs a strong man, and you're my eldest. It's your birthright. Bjorn had been wondering the same thing for weeks. Part of him wanted to run again, to take ship for distant lands where the ghosts of his failures couldn't follow. But he'd learned something from Solveig. That running solved nothing, that duty and responsibility weren't burdens to escape but foundations to build upon. I'll stay, he said. On one condition. Name it. I want to erect a memorial stone near Fjord for Bjorheim and everyone who died there, with Solveig's name carved prominently, so future generations will know what she sacrificed. Eric considered this, then nodded. I'll help you. We'll hire the best carver, make it something that will endure. Over the following weeks, Bjorn threw himself into the work of the farm while planning the memorial. He fished the fjords where he and Magnus had worked as boys, feeling his brother's presence in the familiar rhythms of net and line. He helped with the planting, repaired buildings, and slowly rebuilt connections with neighbors who'd watched him leave in disgrace 5 years before. The nightmares faded gradually, though they never disappeared entirely. Some nights he still saw Solveig dissolving into light, or heard Magnus calling from beneath storm-tossed waves. But they no longer paralyzed him. Instead, they reminded him why he'd chosen to stay, why the work of living and remembering mattered. The memorial stone was finished by midsummer. Bjorn hired a master carver from Bergen, a man who still practiced the old runic scripts alongside Norwegian lettering. They erected it on a rocky outcrop overlooking Fjord, visible to anyone who traveled the coastal path. The inscription read, "Here stood Bjorheim, claimed by the fjord in the winter of 1170. 37 souls lost to the deep. May they rest in peace. And here is remembered Solveig Hakonsdottir, Belva and Cirrus, who gave her life to guide them home. Honor the old ways. Honor the new. Remember balance. Remember duty." On the day they raised the stone, a small crowd gathered. Family, neighbors, curious travelers who'd heard Bjorn's tale. He stood before the memorial and told Solveig's story one more time, speaking to the wind and water and mountains that had witnessed her sacrifice. She died so others could find peace, Bjorn concluded, but she also lived for 5 years after losing everything, because she refused to abandon her duty even when the gods seemed to have abandoned her. That's the lesson, I think. Not that we should seek martyrdom or chase death for honor's sake, but that we should live with purpose, carry our responsibilities with dignity, and never forget that our choices echo beyond our own lives. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, Bjorn lingered by the stone. The summer sun glinted off the fjord, turning the water gold and blue, nothing like the ominous black it had been in winter. Birds called from the cliffs and wildflowers nodded in the breeze. The world continued, indifferent and beautiful. I kept my promises, Bjorn said quietly, speaking to Solveig though he knew she couldn't hear. I came home. I told your story. I'm trying to build something better, though I'm not sure I'm very good at it yet. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of sea and pine, and for just a moment Bjorn could have sworn he heard laughter, warm and free and untroubled. He smiled despite himself. He had one more promise to keep, the one he'd made to himself, to not let guilt define his life. That would be harder than the others, a daily choice rather than a single act. But standing there with the sun warm on his face and the memorial solid beneath his hand, Bjorn thought maybe he could manage it. Maybe he could learn to carry his losses without being crushed by them, to honor the dead by living well rather than dying slowly. He turned away from the fjord and began the walk back to the farm, to his father waiting with questions about the evening's catch, to Astrid's children who'd started calling him Uncle Bjorn, to the mundane and precious work of an ordinary life. Behind him, the memorial stone stood sentinel, keeping watch over the place where gods and mortals had once clashed, where old debts had been settled in blood and magic, where a woman named Solveig had proven that honor wasn't about grand gestures, but about doing what was right even when the cost was everything. The fjord kept its secrets, as it always had. But now at least one story had been told, one sacrifice acknowledged, one debt of memory paid. And in the telling, Bjorn had found something he thought he'd lost forever. Not redemption exactly, but something close. Purpose. Connection. Hope. The sun began its descent toward evening, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the mountains, a wolf howled, and the sound carried across the valleys like an ancient song. Bjorn paused to listen, then continued on his way, heading home to the life he was learning to build from the ruins of his past. In the years to come, travelers would stop at the memorial stone and wonder about the story carved there. Some would know Bjorn's tale and tell it to their companions. Others would simply read the words and continue on, carrying with them the reminder that balance mattered, that duty wasn't weakness, that sacrifice had meaning even when the world seemed to have forgotten. And on winter nights when the fjords froze and the northern lights danced across the sky, people in the villages along the coast would gather by their fires and speak of Solveig of Bjorheim, the Völva who walked into the ice to save souls that weren't even her own, who gave everything to fulfill a responsibility that others had abandoned. They would speak of Bjorn Eriksson too, the exile who returned to tell her story, who kept his promises even when it hurt, who showed that honor wasn't found in running from pain, but in facing it with open eyes and a willing heart. The old gods and the new might debate the details, but the humans who lived in the shadow of mountains and the embrace of fjords understood the truth at the story's core, that some debts must be paid, that some duties cannot be avoided, and that the courage to stand at the threshold, between worlds, whether literal or metaphorical, is what separates those who merely survive from those who truly live. Bjorn reached the farm as the first stars appeared, and he looked back once more at the darkening fjord. Somewhere beneath those waters the stone circle still stood, marking the place where boundaries had blurred and been restored. The breach was sealed, the dead were at rest, and the living could continue their work of making meaning from loss, finding light in darkness, and carrying forward the stories that mattered. He went inside to join his family, closing the door on the night, but not on the memory of what had been lost and learned, because that was the final promise, the one that transcended all others, to remember not just the tragedy but the transformation, not just the sacrifice but the love that had made it meaningful, and in remembering, to live in a way that honored both the dead and the living, the old ways and the new, the gods who might be listening and the humans who most certainly were. The fire burned warm in the farmhouse hearth, and outside the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and the fjord lay still and deep, keeping its ancient watch over the land where people lived and died, and sometimes, when they were very brave or very foolish, touched the divine, the story was told. The debt was paid, and life, as it always did, continued.